Hello, I'm Jim Morningstar, Director of the School of Integrative Psychology and facilitator of the Integrative Life Community Building course. The focus of this second class in our series is reinforcing your internal community by integrating the principles of spiritual psychology into your daily life and operating with the certitude of who you are. Reinforcing the daily roots of mental mastery such that your mind is working for you 24/7. Embodying these principles so you can teach them in your community work and garner support regularly from other like-spirited teachers. Spiritual internal community. Doctrines regarding spiritual beliefs and common communal practice are the domain of religions. Religions over the centuries have been the doorway for countless people to be introduced to the concepts of spirituality and have fostered spiritual experiences for many. One's individual connection to spirit is always unique, however. The purpose of this course is to examine the individual experience of our essence and strengthen our certitude of that connection, regardless of the beliefs and practices with which we may surround this experience. How certain are we of who we are? The koan, "Who am I?" has been used for centuries as a tool to take a seeker deeper and deeper into internal experience beyond feelings and beliefs on the subject, to a deeper experience beyond words, often referred to as an enlightenment experience, which can for many alter the experience of their whole life. To sustain that state for longer and longer periods in one's life is called a steady state. Our ability to internalize and communicate from whatever degree we are connected to our essence is the domain of spiritual psychology, to which we will now turn our attention. What is spiritual psychology? Spiritual psychology is a study of the human psyche that gives credence to the spiritual aspects of the individual and is complemented by a spirituality that honors the role of the mind in embodying spirit. This is in contradistinction from most scientific psychology that sidesteps the existence of spirit and puts it in the category of religious beliefs, and then tries to understand the totality of human motivation and behavior through measurable aspects of the mind and body. Now, there are many schools of spirituality which totally separate the world of the spirit from the material world as something that is a dangerous illusion and needs to be risen above for us to be saved. Spiritual psychology may not be as easy to employ in life as it seems because of hundreds of years of programming about the separation of the so-called physical and spiritual realms. We are all heirs to that programming, and it can have hidden consequences if we ignore the shadows we have inherited. So our task in this seminar is not to try to philosophize our way to heaven, but to play some games and do experiments which challenge old programming and ferret out unconscious beliefs and behaviors that can keep us in a comfortable but deadly rut. And I use the term deadly very pointedly. Our beliefs about who we are, as we shall see by the end of our 8 months together, have led to more deaths than any other cause on the planet. Let's start by examining our beliefs about spirituality. Then we'll move on to the beliefs about the mind. Spirit, by many definitions, is that which animates physical existence, makes the difference between a cadaver and a live human, distinguishes a cell as a self-sustaining entity from inert matter. Spirit is the life-giving factor that is measured by its results, not by mechanical dimensions. It's because of the mind's inability to measure spirit that the relatively new, ironically since the Age of Enlightenment, religion of scientific materialism denies its existence and tries to explain life by random molecular happenstance driven by survival of the fittest. all of which begs the question of who or what is the driver. 97% of the universe is not measurable, so it is relegated to the unknown. That's a lot to dismiss because of one's definition of reality based on reliance of the limited mind as its only tool. So, if you're willing to play with the unknown, yet somehow experienced universe, let's tap into your intuitive wisdom and explore what for you is the basis of your personal spirituality. Spiritual fulfillment is characterized throughout history in many different ways that have seeped into our collective psyches. Enlightenment is often the term used for spiritual realization or fulfillment. But if that term does not work for you, you can just use the phrase, the purpose of my spirituality. Now, in the Creative Life series, from which come the foundational principles underneath the community building in which we are engaged, we play the Enlightenment Game, which is a spirited dialogue between those who define enlightenment as a state of being and those who define it as a process of living. The winners of the game are anyone who finally realizes that both the yin, a state, and the yang, a process, are critical parts of what makes our journey fulfilling. So since it's just me and you on the video for the moment, we'll cut to the chase, as it were, and examine how easy it is for you to embrace both parts of the spiritual puzzle. Take handout 2, Enlightenment Game, and you will complete section 1. I am enlightened when I reach a state of, fill in 10 responses of whatever comes to you, whether they seem contradictory or not. And then, section 2. I live in an enlightened way when I, again, 10 responses of whatever comes to you, whether they seem contradictory or not. Finally, section 3. The definition of enlightenment which resonates most for me is. This exercise is best completed by getting your analytical mind, which critically looks for right and wrong answers, out of the way and just writing what comes to you at the time, whether it, quotes, makes sense or not. This will help us get to that deeper level of programming on which we're looking to put the light of our awareness. So, complete handout 2, sections 1 to 3 now, and come back to the video. How do the yin state and the yang process resonate with you? Which do you seem to favor in your definition? Do you lead your life trying to realize an ideal state? Do you get involved in the process of life without thinking where you're going or what your purpose is? How do you dance with these elements in your existence? Should you take the opportunity to share your responses with someone else willing to play the game, you might find it even more enlightening. I recommend it. Now, I'd like to offer another definition of enlightenment for our consideration. Enlightenment is certain knowledge of absolute truth. Certain knowledge means that I have certitude about it, regardless of temporary doubts or fears. There is a certitude about this absolute truth that will not go away. Absolute truth is a truth that doesn't change with the weather, the age that I am, or with the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, what's popular. Absolute truth always was, is now, always will be. So what is absolute truth? And what is certain knowledge of absolute truth? Can we have that? Do we have that? What's an example? Because this is a little too vague, I believe, for my mind to get at first. The most pertinent and powerful example that I know of absolute truth, of which I have certain knowledge, is that thought is creative. Thought is creative, and I am the thinker. Now, regardless of who we are and what we've been raised in, we have the right to our own thoughts. You can put me in prison, you can torture, you can try to brainwash me. I still have the right to my own thoughts. I still get to choose what my very next thought will be. Now you can say, well, wait a minute. Our parents suggested things. Our teachers suggested things. Our friends suggest things. Turn on the radio or TV and you'll get all sorts of suggestions for what's real and what you should think and believe in. So true. This has driven me to come up with the concept of what I call the ultimate janitor. Who is it that is installing the guru for the day in my mind? At this moment, you can say, well, Jim has some good points. I like that. That's truth. And then you can walk away from the video and a few minutes later say, what a bunch of hogwash. The talk show host I listen to is the guy who's got the best answers. And then you wake up tomorrow morning and say, they're all full of beans. My third grade teacher, Miss McPatrick, she's the one who really had the truth. Well, notice, who is it that's sneaking back there in your mind and installing the guru for the day? Who is it that's setting up the ultimate authority in your life? You may set up that ultimate authority as anyone. Someone you read in a book, someone you heard about, someone you listened to on a podcast. But who is it that accepts that is what you believe, even if it's just for a moment or for your whole life? Uncovering the relationship with your ultimate janitor, I think, puts you closer to the center of your truth. Now, this is not something I thought up myself. I'm just using my own homey vocabulary for what's the core of the major philosophies or religions that have lasted on our planet for any length of time. It's the Trinity of Being. They give recognition to a source that emits intelligence and infinite beingness, great spirit. And from infinite being comes infinite intelligence. Some call it God's plan. And from intelligence comes how we live, comes our manifestation. That's the right order. The source, then the intelligence, and then the creative manifestation. Another form of that is in the paternalistic theology, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. So from the source, or the Father, or you could say Mother, Father, Mother, God is God, the Great Spirit, out of that source comes what we think. As a person, a being made in the image of God, thinks, so they are. As a man thinks, so is he. As a woman thinks, so is she. We are not our thoughts. We're not all these things we thought up about ourselves. We're not a good person or a bad person, because that varies from day to day. That's not absolute truth. Everything that we think up intellectually, as clever as we may be, can be changed tomorrow, because we'll think something different. But what doesn't change is who that thinker is and the power of that thinker to create. We are the thinker that's thinking up this life for us. The God within us, the source, creates our intelligence. Then out of our intelligence comes our manifestation. Again, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. But what's Holy Spirit? What is this manifestation? Well, holy means sacred, to set aside for a special purpose. When something is sacred, you set it aside for a special purpose. So how can we set aside spirit for a special purpose? What does that mean? Well, it's called our material world. That's manifestation. That's what we've created. This computer is spirit set aside for the special purpose of making me feel comfortable because I got my notes lest I forget something. Your viewing device is spirit set aside for the special purpose of your learning, growing, and entertainment. My body is spirit set aside for the special purpose of sharing my light and love in this world, as is yours. So we have the divine right to think what we want and then to manifest it in the material world. This is our game. This is what we are continuously doing. We're all inspired by literature in which someone thinks, this is what I want. And they stick with it through all obstacles. We love to read stories about someone that overcame a great physical disease or social pressure or whatever challenge they faced, and whose intention, whose clarity, whose energy was so directed and so focused that in the face of all sorts of naysaying and reasons to the contrary, they prevail and they create their dream. They were on fire. They were in touch with that source, and they would not buy anything to the contrary. We've all experienced times of doing this, and we're all avowed that we came here to have more of that, and to have that come through more fully. There were examples of those who really embodied that eternal truth and demonstrated it in the world. Jesus, for example, was someone who was so clear that he could say to all of the learned people at that time, without having read it in books or from anyone else, I and the Father are one. It means I'm one with Source. Now, the implications of that were quite clear to those learned pundits at the time. If this little carpenter kid who hasn't even gone to rabbinical school is walking around calling himself one with God, we'd have to admit the same thing is true for everyone. This would upset the whole hierarchical social order we created. So consensus reality, our habit of separating ourselves from the source. Let's put God in the church. Let's put God in the tabernacle. Let's put God in the sky. Get us off the hook. Then I don't have to take responsibility for my life. It's the government. It's the taxes. It's my neighbors. My mother-in-law. It's always someone else that has ultimate responsibility for my happiness. We've all gained great expertise in doing that. As much as theoretically and philosophically, there are probably not many watching this that would espouse victim consciousness as the way they want to live. We all still fall into it. I still find myself doing it. Oh, who put that in my way? So what can truly bring us back to full ownership of our life? Jesus' enlightenment was stated when he was young. I and the Father are one. One of Buddha's definitions of enlightenment was to be able to pass judgment on every thought. Now, judgment not as good or bad, but to take responsibility for every thought that I think. To know that this is my thought and I am the thinker. Yes, I can say in court, oh, my brother told me robbing a bank would be a good idea. Well, as they say, tell it to the judge. Justice will dictate that you're responsible for your thoughts and consequent actions. You can't pass the buck. Each of us has that ultimate responsibility for creating our reality. And it's not just religious icons that have gotten this. All successful people have their versions of this. Henry Ford had his version. He was a pretty creative fellow. He said, whether you think you're right or whether you think you're wrong, you're right. So you're getting to say whether you see yourself as worthy or unworthy, smart or not smart, creative or non-creative, or by taking on these judgments from others. It's by dint of identifying with our mind, which separates us into pieces, that we reject responsibility for our wholeness. We create the fear that we will be put in categories of the goods and the bads, the enlightens and the unenlightens, the responsible and the irresponsible, because that's what goes on inside. It's really the part of me that's going to judge the other part of me, and there are fears on both of these parts. So I live in the fear of the illusion of brokenness that my mind creates. My game then is to try to be good enough, and I can never do enough good to earn what I already am. So it behooves us to set up games in our life that lead to greater light and a greater sense of certitude about who we essentially are. That's my intent in setting up this game of coming together to own our awakeness, all of our creativity. You might say, well, this is just for philosophical and spiritual, airy-fairy people. No. No matter what domain you come from, if you're honest about finding the truth, you can come to a similar conclusion. Take the hardest of sciences, physics. Physics is dedicated to the scientific principle. Scientific principle is you make an observation, something you can see, you can feel, and you have a hypothesis about that observation. You test out that hypothesis, and if it proves accurate, that's what is called the truth. It's stated as a law. An example of this would be our friend Isaac sitting under a tree, wondering about the nature of the universe and where his girlfriend is this afternoon and such things, and bonk, an apple hits him on the head. What's this? Why does this apple always seem to come straight at me when I'm under it? Why doesn't the apple go sideways? Why does it always come down? He makes an observation. Apple on tree falls to earth. Isaac Newton is his name, by the way. So, apple falls to earth. How come it doesn't happen the other way? So, observation, hypothesis. Well, there's a force that is bringing the apple to the earth. That's a hypothesis. I can't see this force, but that's why I've got to make a hypothesis about it. A force that moves the smaller body towards the larger body. All right, let's test this out. So that's the next phase of the scientific approach, is that we'll have to test out the hypothesis that there is a force bringing the smaller body to the larger body. So we get all our friends, and they all have apples, and they all drop them, and sure enough, yes, well, maybe it's the conditions. Let's do it at night. Maybe at night the apples don't go down. Maybe they go up. So we try for all the independent variables. We do it at night, we do it when it's raining, we do it in the winter. Still seems to work. There still seems to be this force there bringing the smaller body to the larger body. We get tired of dropping apples and finally say, enough already. That's a law, the law of gravity. Now, you get enough people, enough divine intelligence that agrees on a similar belief, consensus reality, those are very strong laws. It's not something easily changed because they're very compelling. We've got a lot of people subscribing to that law and agreeing to it. If we get a bunch of people that are flying around here disregarding the law of gravity, that's very disconcerting. We might have to burn them at the stake. The Wright brothers wanted to challenge that law. They wanted to take heavier than air objects and make them fly. Well, they got called all sorts of names for that. That's unnatural. If God wanted us to fly, he would have, whatever. And so they had to look at all sorts of beliefs and come up with beliefs that would slowly, gradually, help to challenge that belief in gravity, that nothing heavier than air could actually stay up, that God didn't create that way, like a bird or a butterfly. And so they watched birds and butterflies, and they invoked other laws, the laws of aerodynamics. And eventually, they prevailed. Their belief was strong enough to challenge other well-established beliefs and create a reality which we now all take for granted. I'm taking an airplane to get me from the U.S. to the Mideast in a month. Now, no one says, an airplane? What's that? No, I don't believe it. No, it can't happen. Well, maybe 200 years ago, that would be the prevailing truth. No one goes across the ocean in a day. Now, of course, we all believe it. We've created this world that way now. Space travel, enough Star Trek films, and interplanetary travel is starting to seem real. We're starting to change our beliefs. It's even what many in the hard sciences came to realize. If you look at that scientific method, you see that at a certain point there's still a judgment call in there. There's still a point at which you say, this is the law, I'm convinced. There's a faith that takes place in there, smaller body to larger body. That's the way it is. And it's very difficult, once I've made up my mind that that's the way it is, to change it. We as children made up our mind about the way life was and the way we were. And we're now spending our life looking to see if we can change some of these things. Not all of them. A lot of them are great. But there are some things that we really got attached to, that this is the way I am, or my family is, or people on earth are, or men are, or women are, or whatever has served you to not have to change. It's not easily dislodged. Well, in the hard sciences, the physicists, wanting to get to the core of what's ultimate reality here, invented the concept a long time ago of the atom. Originally, the atom was posited as the basic building block of reality. And that prevailed for a long time, until someone came along and said, well, what about half an atom? Oh, there's no half an atom. Atom is the basic, they were told. So they started to think, how can I challenge that idea that the atom is indivisible? They came up with the cyclotron or atom smasher. And then they started discovering more ways of dividing matter. And what they realized is that if they could think up a clever enough way to do something, they would alter reality. You would always alter the way things are seen, until they finally got to realize, in pursuing this far enough, that the smallest particle in the universe was thought. Some physicists have actually come to that. Sounds pretty metaphysical, doesn't it? I mean, not all of them would agree, but many came to that conclusion because whatever you could think of, you could keep going further, creating more refined instruments. They came to realize that, well, the carpet under our feet isn't solid, nor is the concrete or the earth underneath. There's a lot of space in between the particles that make up these materials. Now they've conducted experiments in which it was shown that the observer influences the energetic trajectory of matter. And they came to recognize that it's our thought which is at the source of creating this reality. So let's take this home. Let's take it home to what that means for us personally. Now, we're going to do an exercise that's kind of a cyclotron, but this will be a thought smasher to break apart some of the fixed thought patterns you may have. It can be a very compelling magnet. We're going to use the tool of a sentence stem to direct our thoughts on the subject with the intention of understanding it more fully. The sentence stem is this: my fear of seeing myself as the creative source is. You'll take handout 3, being the creative source, and in section 1, complete the sentence stem with what comes up for you at least 10 times. My fear of seeing myself as the creative source is, it could be, for example, I'll be seen as arrogant, or I'll have to be good all the time, and what fun is that? Or it brings up a sense of unworthiness, that I don't take enough responsibility. Remember, we're doing the exercise to bring out and break up some of our deeper fears, not to reinforce them. You can truly amaze yourself with what's hidden in there if you let yourself go deep enough. Your mind may try to abort the process by saying, I don't really believe that. Well, of course you don't consciously, but a part of you that is in your reptilian brain might. So just write whatever comes up. If you can write 20, all the better. Well, when you have exhausted section 1, take a few clearing breaths and complete section 2. I make it safer for me to be creative source by. Again, write whatever comes up. For example, by thinking that I don't have to do it all today, or trusting the universe is supporting me and everyone else in this process. Now, note there's a difference between making it safe and playing it safe. We're not talking about playing it safe, like avoiding taking any risks. Is that really safe? Or is that just building me up for a rude awakening that I missed the boat of creating the life of fulfillment, which is my heart's true desire? So write at least 10 responses for each section. And more is quite okay. Stop the video now and complete handout 3, sections 1 and 2. Again, any of these exercises where we talk about a fear of this is not for whipping up fear. It's for getting it out there. And not even, I would say, for getting rid of fear. It's translating the fear energy into energy we can use, like the cyclotron, which is always some form of excitement, some form of safety. So the energy is not bad. Fear is life energy with the thought, I'm going to be hurt. If I can change that thought, I can use the energy. Wait a minute. Hold on. There's a clinker here. I found something that doesn't fit with this great theory I've been talking about. So far, I've been saying that we are the creators of our reality. Well, what about if I call myself ugly, stupid, unworthy? Does that make me ugly, stupid, and unworthy ultimately? I believe that there are substantive qualities of being itself which we don't alter by what we think. I believe there are truths beyond which we just don't go snapping our fingers and have changed. Beauty, love, truth, simplicity. I believe there are unalterable truths about existence. If I say, there is no love in the world, does that mean there is no love in the world for anyone? Love is ultimately destroyed because I, the creator of Jim Morningstar's universe, have pronounced it dead? We get ultimate authority of setting up our universe according to the principles that we espouse. And if we pick principles that are not in alignment with ultimate truth, I'm in trouble. The truth is a rock, and it will crush you, is the old injunction. Meaning, that's what will happen if I do not align myself with the substantive qualities of being itself, with ultimate truth. I can decide that rhubarb pie makes me ill, and no one can stop that from happening for me, because that's my reality. I have the right to get sick when I eat rhubarb pie, and I'm going to hold firm to that. And indeed, if I continue to affirm it and continue to create that reality, I continue to produce those results. But I do not ultimately destroy the truth that my essential potential for having rhubarb pie be a satisfying part of my heaven. This actually goes back to an old story, and I think it's illustrative. It's the basic story of the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden is the story of our development in consciousness. That original state of the Garden of Eden is the state in which there is no separation, in which I have everything. I'm existing in a state of bliss and interconnectedness and harmony with the all. Now, even in the Garden of Eden, there's a couple of rules. We as creators set up a game of the Garden of Eden for our education and growth. God the Source says to the manifested inhabitants, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden, there are two trees in the garden. One is the tree of life, and eat fully. It is at your disposal. You are what you eat, so eat fully of life. Acknowledge that your source is life. Enjoy it. There's another tree, which is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat that. In other words, don't swallow the fruit of that tree. Acknowledge that it's your servant. Enjoy it. It's wondrous. It's our mind. Our mind is this knowledge of good and evil. Our mind creates a good day and a bad day. Our mind is creating this all the time. Now, you enjoy it. Your mind is there to play with, but don't swallow it. Don't believe that that's what you are, and that some days you're evil and rotten, and other days, no. You can like this kind of behavior and not that kind of behavior, but that's not who you really are. You can like this kind of behavior and not that kind of behavior, but that's not who you really are. Well, as we know, the plot thickens, and enjoying the wonderful Garden of Eden, along comes the snake. Now, the snake is the personification of the mind's logic, and it argues us into positions we may not always want to be in. It's the animal that, when committed to a direction, cannot back up. So the snake proposes to Eve, hey, you think this is good? This is nothing. If you really want to be like God, eat this fruit. Don't let any prohibitions or rules about what you should or shouldn't eat stop you. If you really want to be like God, eat this fruit and swallow your mind. Well, of course, I really want to be like God. I have a brief blip there of thinking that I'm really not already like God. I think we've all experienced that now and then, yes? Thinking we're not God. Oh, yes, I want to be like God. I swallow it. And then, of course, I want to sell others the same fruit. Come on, try it. You'll like it. It's great. See, we get to do and swallow whatever we want. Now, this is something that we experience daily. It's not the purview of just snakes. It's any time I use logic to defy my spiritual principles. We get it all the time through the media. If you really want to have friends, use this deodorant. If you really want to have status in your community, drive this kind of car. Ah, see this image. See how loved and respected and revered these people are. Be like them. So what we notice here is that we've been slipped something. In logic, there's a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. We've been slipped a major premise that once we buy it, everything else follows. It's hard to back up. So that's what the major premise that the snake slipped to Eve. We already mentioned it. You're not really like God, but you will be if you go to this seminar, watch this video, live in this neighborhood. That is, eat this apple. So the major premise there kind of slips by. And once we buy it, we're off to the races. Once you buy that you are not divine, that you're some poor, ignorant schlep, that maybe if you try hard enough, you will up your level of enlightenment slightly with a lot of work and sincerity, and maybe be more godlike someday before you croak. Well, you've set up a whole game, and everything follows then in your life. All of the hurdles, all of the disaffirming messages, all of the battles that go on. And we all do this. But to recognize it and call it for what it is a doorway to getting back into the garden. We expose the game that once Adam and Eve swallowed that they are not the same essences of God, that once we buy that we really don't have friends, that we really don't have status in the community, we're set up to be sold that if we brushed with this toothpaste, and maybe if we buy this car, and maybe if we read these books, and maybe if we, we're always not there, but hoping to get there. We get stuck in the yang definition of enlightenment and forget the yin definition is already true. No one watching this video is going to be more divine after watching it than before. Now, you may begin to affirm and enjoy it more, but you are already essentially divine. So we begin to see that we've taken ourselves out of the garden. This is the Garden of Eden? This place I'm sitting in right now? What, are you kidding? So we put the veil over our eyes, seeing ourselves in the valley of tears, as it were. And once we've done that, there's only one way back to the garden. As the story goes, God puts an angel with a flaming sword at the entrance to the garden. This is the sword of truth. So I don't get back into the garden until I start telling the truth. Yes, I really am supported in this world by loving presence. Yes, I really have and am a beautiful light being. Yes, I also suffer and stub my toe and feel victim-y at times. I do all those things, but that's not who I essentially am. So as I master the swordsmanship of using that double-bladed sword, I can use it against me or for me, of telling the truth, and I master every thought, as Buddha advised, is that thought truth? Slice off the rotten part and get to the essence. When I start telling the truth about myself, I gain readmittance into the garden, my own space of heaven. And indeed, it's no place I have to go. It's already here. What happens is I start waking up and recognizing I've never left. But I've played the game of not being worthy enough, of not being rich enough, of not being intelligent enough, of not. The game of the mind. The mind is the great divider. The mind is always dividing things. Isn't this a great day? Well, it could be better. Aren't we having a good time? Well, actually, I'm a little achy, a little bit. The mind is always finding the other side of things. We're proud of that. And the mind is not the bad guy, actually. The mind is not evil. It's a wondrous tool. In fact, in a little while, we're going to look at how to bring our mind back into alignment and have it really work for us in bringing us back into the garden. It's a formidable enemy and a wonderful ally. In fact, an incredible ally once I master it. So I can only come back into the garden as I start to tell the truth about myself. Yes, I may be sitting here scared right now, or skeptical, or hungry, or any number of things. And I am a loving source whose intention is to what? What is your intention? So each of us has answered that. Each of us knows when I first suggested in our meditation to go inside and ask, what is it that I really want? What is it that I really want from doing this course? What is it that I really want in my life? And I keep approaching. I keep getting closer. As a number of people have said, it's nothing someone else can tell me. I know when I'm right on. I know when I'm clear. And I've got the static when I'm tuning in. And dong, ah, that's my song. They're playing my tune. That's it. And my hand is on the knob. I have the opportunity now, during this next 7 months, to review how I set up my life, how I've set up the games that are being played in my life, and the people that I'm playing them with. So one of my fears of being the creative source is that I'll be very lonely. Oh yeah, there's Mr. Tell the Truth, huh? Don't invite him to your party. What a downer. Yeah, those are just fears. So we can create that garden and we can do it with each other. I've got a surprise for you. We have a guest expert on this subject, a guest lecturer that's going to come in right now, as a matter of fact, and give you the missing pieces to help this fit in your life. Make it personal and meaningful to you. You will invite this expert in by taking handout 4, The Truth About Creative Thought. And in a moment, you will let one of your ultimate janitors, your guest experts, of course, there are more than one if you haven't already guessed it by now, come out of the closet and complete section 1. How my thought is creating my life is. List at least 5 ways or examples. Upon completing section 1, go right to section 2 and have your second expert rebut the first with how my thought is not creating my life. List 5 ways or examples. Now, upon completing section 2, go right to section 3 and have your first expert rebut the second with how my thought is truly creating my life is. List 5 different ways or examples. Then, upon completing section 3, go right to section 4 and have your second expert again rebut the first with how my thought is definitely not creating my life is, and list at least 5 different ways or examples. Now, watch what happens as you engage in this inner dialogue. What is familiar to you? What is different? Go ahead and stop the video and complete all of handout 3 and then come back to the video. Now, you may continue this exercise as long as you could benefit from it, because as many reasons as we can come up with for one side of the argument, there are that many plus one more on the other side. This is how our mind works, till we stop it and say, this is what I choose to believe because it fits best for my sense of the ultimate truth and works best for me. This is claiming your divine right and setting you off on a conscious trajectory of life. Not that you will have all the answers by any means, but you will consciously choose your results to help you grow in self-awareness rather than blaming someone or something else for your unhappiness. The spiritual life worth living, as it's been called. You get to choose the basis of your spiritual life, which will attract like-spirited individuals to your community. For me, this is heaven. This is the re-entered Garden of Eden. I have come to realize that although some of the content of this course goes back to the first spiritual psychology courses in which I was a student and then subsequently which I taught, this is an advanced level course. Not because the principles are more complicated. The truth is, they're more simple. Advanced to me means going deeper and higher with what is core truth. It takes an uptick in courage to do this. Advanced for me means not distracting myself with poetic or intellectually stimulating ways of reiterating what we already know, but to hold our feet to the fire in applying the basic principles of truth, simplicity, and love every day. I believe that the more of us support each other in this advanced work, the more astounding will be our individual and community growth. Holding you in my heart as fellow travelers on the road home, I send and receive blessings for our circle and for all sentient beings till next class. Blessings in light and love.